I'm currently an associate professor at Mekong Asia Pacific University. I teach mostly classes on international relations and decision making, a little bit of strategy. I also teach some classes on research methodology at the graduate level and undergraduate level. And I've also taught first year students before the transition class between high school and university. Well, I don't really have a favorite book, but I read a lot, right? And so there's a lot of books that I really like and some books that I love. But there's a particular book that I think everyone should read. And whether you're in later stages of life or earlier stages in school, I think it's really a valuable book. And that's called Factfulness. And it's written by someone named Hans Rosling, who is also a professor and unfortunately just died a few years ago, passed away a few years ago. But this is a book that I think is invaluable and really very important for everyone to read. Well, let's just think about this for a second. So the book is really designed to teach you about what's happening in the world a little bit and to dispel some myths that we may have been taught throughout our lives. So, when you're in high school or junior high school and you're starting to learn about the world and learning facts, you're learning from teachers who learned the material, 10 years before you or maybe even longer, depending on how old the teacher is. So 10, 20, 30 years before. Then you get to college and you're still learning some facts, but again, the professors there, they learned their data, their information decade before or so, right? Uh, let's now fast forward. You graduate, you get a job, and 20, 30 years later, you're in a position where you're finally able to make, some real policy decisions. And the information that you're going on around the world, the kind of things that you remember and that you learned about the world, are 20, 30, 40 years old now, right? So the data that you have is very, very old. And I think that most people making decisions, they're remembering what they learned in high school or before, and the data is very old, and they're not making very good decisions anymore because they're basing it on stuff that they learned a long time ago. I want to give you an example. So in this chart, this is actually a website created by Hans Rosling called Gapminder, and I will give you the link. And this chart shows the income levels around the world in 1977. And you can see that this was actually the year that I was born, 1977. And you can see that on this chart, there are actually two bumps, right? There's, the wealthy countries, the developed countries, and then there's the developing world, right? And so this is what we were taught. We were taught that there's really two worlds. There's the developing world and the developed world, and that they are treated differently and they act differently around, based on policies and economics and values and all kinds of things, right? But if we fast forward, if we move through time in this chart, and we just advance a little bit, and we move closer and closer to today, there are two things that you'll notice that are happening in this chart. One thing that's happening is that all the countries are sort of moving forward. And you can see this dotted line here. This is the basically severe poverty line, right? And before, in 1977, many countries were below this line. But now you can see that all the countries are sort of moving above this line, right? And by the time we reach today, only like 10% of the countries are now below this severe poverty line. That's the first thing you see. The other thing you see is that these two bumps, what used to be the developing world and the developed world, don't exist anymore. Now it's just one bump. It's one long sort of normal distributed curve, right? Normal distribution. And so you see this curve that now represents reality today. And the problem is that many people are making policy decisions about the old look and what we were taught when I was younger, that there are two different worlds, that there's a developing world and a developed world. And actually those two words really don't exist anymore. I mean, and those two words shouldn't be used by even professors. And even I find myself going back and saying those words sometimes when I'm in class, and I have to catch myself and say, wait a minute, that's not the way it is anymore. There are not two worlds. There's not a developing world and a developed world anymore. So it gives you an example of one of the things that the book talks about, and the kind of myth and kind of things that we need to revise our facts and make sure we're looking at the world the right way. So mostly for me, the reason that I keep working and keep learning and reading throughout my life is just my curiosity. I'm a very curious person. If I see a puzzle or something I don't understand, I'm really interested in finding the answer to that puzzle and finding the answer to whatever mystery I'm looking at. So this often happens, in any field. I'm curious about many things. So I read science magazines. I'll read books about, poker, whatever it is. If I'm curious about something, I'm going to go dive into it and read about it a lot. Well, I think today, one of the things that's really important and interesting is that you have so much information available to you, and it's right at your fingertips. I mean, if you wanted to learn how to trade options, you could spend, maybe even half a day, even just a few hours, learning online, watching some videos, and learning how to trade financial options. If you wanted to learn about international relations, you could spend a half an hour or half a day and learn the basic stuff about international relations. You can learn about psychology, mathematics, pretty much anything that you want to learn is out there now available for you to learn on the internet. Now, the difficult part of that for younger people is figuring out the good information versus the bad information. So it's what we call informational literacy. Right now, the problem with having so much information out there available to you so easily is that a lot of the information is really terrible. And anybody can upload videos now, and anybody can type up a blog or whatever and post it all over the internet, and then people are reading it and people are learning about it, and it might be totally wrong. Or it might even be someone's agenda. They want you to believe something for a particular purpose. They have a particular advocacy perspective, and they want to change people's minds because of a certain issue. So although you have the ability to learn pretty much anything you want, it doesn't help you understand what the good information is versus the bad information. And more than that, it doesn't really help you think about the material. Just learning about something, in terms of a skill or, coding or mathematics or something, that might be possible. But then trying to apply it or learn how to use it or learn how to think about it in an interesting way, that it might be harder to do just by learning online. But I do encourage students to seek out videos and information and books and anything that they're curious about. Just dive into it. It's so easy today to get information and to dive into those things. When I was a kid, I actually had to go to the library and use the card catalog. Like, we actually had the box, and I went in and found the card and find the ID number on there and go to the stacks and find the book, and all that stuff doesn't exist anymore today. So in a sense, you're really lucky, but in a sense, it becomes more challenging because of the sort of information overload.